Welcome to a new daily top Askreddit video. Today's topic: Autopsy. Doctors of Reddit, what was the biggest revelation you had to a person's death after you carried out the procedure? Assisted with a post-mortem when I was a student. Female patient died in her 40s. Her medical history had extensive complaints of abdominal pains. One drive even referred to her as a hypochondriac and others commented on apparent anxiety. Opened her abdomen and she had extensive scar tissue. She was absolutely massacred inside from endometriosis. She suffered for decades and never got referred for a laparoscopy. She didn't have fucking anxiety, she had a medical condition. Edit, a few clarifications. Patient cause of death was unrelated. I won't give any details because it may get too identifying. I am UK based and this was an NHS post-mortem. Patient did not have diagnosed anxiety. Doctors referred to her anxiety only in relation to her abdominal pain complaints, no other known history. Thank you for sharing your stories with me and others. I will take the time to read every one. Honestly, I'm not even surprised by this story. Me neither. Oh, it's just Womb's pain, been there, done that. It's so awful that some doctors don't take conditions like EDO or PCO seriously and won't refer a woman to go and see a specialist or a gyno. That poor woman. I hope she has comfort and peace now. Even today, we are still just seen as hysterical women who can't tell the difference between our uncontrollable emotions and pain. My best friend was told for years that her cyclical vomiting, right upper quadrant pain, weakness, etc. was stress-related, and Kaiser prescribed psych meds and group therapy. So many visits when she couldn't hold down anything for days, they'd hydrate her, give her Zofra and Butyl, and send her home. 2 years deep into her being sick, I call her and she's talking funny. I rush to her house and she's as yellow as Marge Simpson. My once healthy, slim thick best friend had obvious muscle wasting, ascites, fluid in the belly, and her face was gaunt. I rushed her to one of Stanford's area hospitals, and I was lucky enough to know the RN. A few hours later we had a diagnosis, liver failure due to untreated Addison's. Her bile ducts were occluded as well. She was in an adrenal crisis, and the doc said 2 more days and she would have gone into multi-organ failure. But she just needed group therapy, remember. It was her lady stress causing this, according to Kaiser. Now she's waiting on a transplant and I'm too sick to help her right now. Never back down. Get second opinions. Get third opinions. Fourth opinions. When my parents were in medical school they attended an autopsy of a patient who had died in a car accident. Autopsy revealed that apparently this guy had survived a chest shot in Vietnam years ago that the surgeons/medics left in rather than perform risky surgery. The accident had migrated the bullet to his heart and was ruled the cause of death. Last casualty of the Vietnam War. This was actually in the IITs a bit before I was born actually. This does make me wonder if there's a possibility for other Vietnam veterans, or Korean War veterans to possibly have a similar situation or straight up lead poisoning. Or in the future if there's a chance for this to happen to Iraq or Afghanistan veterans. Not mine but a doctor I used to work with. Back when he was in school, he would do his cadaver labs really late at night. Too many people during the day. One time it was really late. Around 2 a.m. He was listening to his lecture on his headphones and he saw the cadaver's arm move forward/twitch. He thought it was just his mind playing tricks on him. Then he saw it again. Proceeded to run away in a panic. He told a few of his classmates what happened but nobody believed him. Next day they had a group cadaver lab with the same cadaver. The arm twitched yet again. The professor did some digging and it turns out the patient's pacemaker was still fully functional and occasionally fired, causing the arm twitch. He was so relieved. He thought there was a zombie in there. The professor did some digging. Literally. I may be late to the party but I finally have a good story to tell. In medical school, my group's cadaver was an 80-plus-year-old female who was extremely unfit. Morbidly obese with muscles half the size of any other cadavers. Her pectoral muscles were paper thin, to get some reference. We figured she was bedridden during her last few months, which would somewhat explain these findings. When we started our neurology unit and began to dissect the temporal fossa, I discovered a small metal pellet under the skin behind her right ear. My tank mates and I went on to find dozens of these metal pellets strewn around her head's anatomy, with some lodged into the cranium and others in the bones of her face. We contacted her living relatives to get some clarification, and they ended up revealing that when this lady and her brother were children, they said she was 8 years old, they were playing with an old decorative rifle that the family had mounted above the fireplace. Long story short, the brother accidentally discharged the rifle into the girl's face. The aftermath was this lady was blind and wheelchair bound for the rest of her life, and the pellets weren't all removed. It was an interesting dissection with that information from then on, but a sobering moment in reminding our class that our cadavers are humans with their own struggles and rich lives. If you're considering donating your body to science, please know that we don't take the responsibility lightly, and a million thanks aren't enough. I have more stories if anyone is curious. Edit. I should add that her granddaughter made a point of saying this lady did not hold a grudge on her brother, and they lived full lives on happy terms. My old martial art instructor was a policeman in the 80s. He was shot with birdshot in his torso and many of the pellets were not removed. He said that sometimes they make their way to the surface and he can just scratch them out. That made me feel a bit uneasy. Edit. My most upvoted comment ever, and it's about me feeling uneasy. Thanks Reddit. My friend once cremated a lady, and when they pulled the table out there were 3 sets of forceps sitting there. Most likely she died in surgery, but I always thought it was crazy those were left in, and whatever metal they are made of clearly has a higher melting point than cremation temps. After my mother was cremated, my sister was curious and wanted to take a peek at her ashes inside the urn. She opened it and said, "Oh." Right on top of these fine ashes was the hardware from the broken ankle repair she had gotten years before. You know the ashes are only fine because they're ground up. Without that, you'd have chunks of bone. May the forceps be with her. My friend had to do an autopsy on a baby. The dad claimed she died after rolling off a couch. My friend found that the kid was slammed against a hard surface multiple times. Dad eventually admitted he hit the baby against the wall after she wouldn't stop crying. My friend had to quit that job cause it was so taxing mentally. Dad eventually admitted he hit the baby against the wall after she wouldn't stop crying. The sad part about this is that babies sometimes just cry. There is nothing wrong with them. They are tired and just can't sleep. It's common for hospitals to specifically warn new parents not to shake their babies because sleep-deprived parents with colicky babies are sometimes driven to do that out of desperation. But I have never heard them having to warn specifically about slamming your baby into a wall. Jesus Christ. I hope your friend is doing okay. She's still struggling with depression, but she's much happier at her new job. I work in a field that exposes me to seeing a lot of children with NATs, non-accidental trauma. It is so emotionally taxing to see these kids, but the babies are the hardest. I've seen babes under a year with 25+ bone fractures. I drive the long way home these nights and cry before I pick up my own babies. Edit. My first award, I appreciate it truly. There are so many others who work the harder emotional labor than I do, but those who truly deserve awards are those kids. I think of most of them daily and hope so much more for their lives. Edit 2. I feel truly blessed y'all. I'm going to hug my babies extra tonight and give extra love to those who need it this week. Thank you. While in medical school, we had to observe an autopsy and could assist. One of the lectures was to observe for head trauma. You do this by hitting the skull with a hard object, scissor or the like. A hollow sound is normal but a dull sound indicates trauma. One of the other students did this exam and found a dull sound. The coroner had not yet himself examined the person and was very surprised, as he had not been informed by the police of head trauma. They then continued to examine the head and they found a gunshot wound through the skull. All of a sudden the person was a crime scene and they had to call the police again and leave the person as untouched as possible. I believe it was later confirmed that the person had shot himself, but it could have been a murder. How do you miss a gunshot wound to the head? Edit. And if the person did commit suicide by gun, then the gun would be with the body, right? Like a dead person with a gun in their hand isn't a clue at all. Second edit. Obviously the question is rhetorical. Stop asking me if I'm blind to the poor quality of police. You don't aim properly. What do you think killed him? Could it be that hole in the skull with blood pouring out? Eshidk, I doubt it. Let's let the coroner unravel this mystery. Masters in Forensic Pathology here. You'd be surprised to know the number of people that have life-threatening issues that never went diagnosed and that they didn't die from. Seen an older guy who died of pneumonia in hospital. On autopsy the guy had both an enlarged heart and a couple of medium-sized aneurysms in the brain. Another guy in his -70s apparently came into the and had chest pain, then died shortly after. Dies of a heart attack but also had cancer. In less natural circumstances though, saw a guy who had been shot in the head a couple of times. 3 definite entries and a blown out skull, but police only found 1 bullet. Couldn't find the other bullet in his head at all. Assumed the police missed it. Went on as normal with the autopsy until we got to the chest cavity. The other bullet was just chilling beside his lung. Turns out it entered the skull, hit the inside, ricocheted down his neck and into the chest. That was pretty wild. It's so wild to me how on the one side, humans can be so resilient and survive horrible things, and on the other side just how fragile and quick life can be taken from us. 2 very different extremes. Thanks for sharing your perspective. There's people out there drinking at least a fifth a day, going to work, living a seemingly normal life otherwise. Then you have someone else stub their toe and die of an infection. Edit, till how several famous people died. Rip Bob Marley. Edit 2, I get it, he died of cancer that was found in his toe. I looked it up because people just kept saying Rip Bob Marley, didn't mean to imply he specifically died from stubbing his toe. Supposedly, my grandpa had cancer when he died, but it was a heart attack that killed him. It's actually pretty common for older cancer patients to not treat it. Makes sense if you're in your 80s and have a form of cancer that doesn't really progress for 20 years, then why put yourself through chemo, radiation, or surgery?